Okay, welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my co-host, Lena Marvin. Hi, Lena. Hi, and Dave Burstein. Hello,
Hello.
Dave. And today we have a very special guest, Professor Danny Huang, who is an assistant professor at, well, soon to be, starting this fall at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. He's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Information Technology Policy, Department of Computer Science at Princeton University. Professor Huang obtained his PhD in computer science from the University of California, San Diego. His PhD dissertation uses cryptocurrencies to measure financial activities of malicious actors to uncover potential identities of these actors. That sounds pretty interesting. Danny Huang is also a graduate of Williams College in Massachusetts with a BA in computer science. Danny, welcome to Community and Technology.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I understand that you recently completed a major study around the Internet of Things and smart home devices. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The problem that we're interested in is that, all these days, many of us have smart home devices in our house, like smart TVs, Alexa, smart cameras, but many of us have this problem. Are these smart devices watching us or listening to us or spying us? Well, the thing is, it's not an easy answer because, like, when you buy a piece of smart device at home, like a smart TV or a smart Alexa or Google Home device, these are just like black boxes. Like, you turn it on, it works. You don't know what they are doing in the background. So many of my friends, actually, many of my colleagues have smart devices, and they have this problem. So I was thinking, maybe I could build a tool to help everybody who have smart devices in their homes. So starting sometime mid last year, my colleagues and I built a piece of software called Iot Inspector that would help just everyday consumers find out more about their smart devices to see if there are any security or privacy risks, whether their smart devices are listening to them. And one evidence we found is that, if you're watching a smart TV and you have the software Iot Inspector turned on, you'll find out that your smart TV, while it's just streaming some, say CNBC passively, your TV is talking to dozens of advertising and tracking companies that are watching you. So this is basically the high level idea.
So do you have any IoT in your home?
I do. I consider myself a living guinea pig because I want to see what's going on. I personally have a Google Chromecast in the house, as well as 3 or 4 smart plugs. I do have a surveillance camera, but I don't turn it on unless I'm out of the house. And I usually turn it on when I want to, say, observe what my guinea pigs are doing at home. But otherwise, I use Google Chromecast on a daily basis. I know, even as a developer, as the main developer of Iot Inspector, I know that while I'm watching videos on Chromecast, I know that my Chromecast is talking to dozens of advertising tracking companies. As a consumer, I say that this is alarming, but also as a consumer, I say that at this point, there's not that much I can do right now except to rely on this service. That being said, if I'm really diligent about my privacy, I could, say, for instance, create a fresh Google account for just my Chromecast to watch TV, so that whatever my activities on my fresh Google account won't be linked to my main Google account for tracking. Not won't be, but unlikely to be linked.
Lena, I know you've got a lot more experience with some of these in-home devices than I do. I've got a couple that I have yet to hook up. So, I mean, I really want to kind of have you kind of lead off the conversation, okay, if you would, with the professor.
So, with this notion that it's connecting to dozens, it's such an This is fascinating. So I also use Chrome. My mother is a big fan of the Roku ecosystem. My mom is an interesting consumer in that she tends to be an early adopter of various tech. So she went for the Alexa. I have a Google Home node that I will ask, hey, what's the weather going to be? So what technologies do you use to watch this sort of conversational back and forth? Are you using like Wireshark or some other technology?
Before IoT Inspector, I would say that for researchers and for consumers alike, pretty much the only way to find out what's going on with your IoT devices is to use technical tools such as Wireshark, like Lena mentioned, or things like T-Speed Dump or things like that, which could be difficult to set up because if you think about it, if you use, say, Wireshark, you would have to set up a wireless access point, and then you have to connect your smart devices to the new wireless access point, and you use your Wireshark to listen in to the traffic on the new wireless access point. It is a pain even for researchers because we have to get access points ourselves, spare access points in office, and we have to reconfigure smart devices to connect from the original access point, their original Wi-Fi network, to the experimental Wi-Fi network, so that we can check on this traffic. So it's a pain for researchers. I'm sure it's probably a much higher technical barrier for typical consumers as well. That's why we set out the task of creating something much easier for average consumers. No need for dedicated hardware, no need for dedicated access point. Just have your computer, download IoT Inspector, and just run it. And you can see pretty much the network traffic on the smart devices in your home.
This is super cool. I'm gonna install this. This is very cool.
Yeah, and one of our goals is to make it as simple as it is. We won't say that it is absolutely simplest. We are still in iterations of building this particular software. We're having many users try it out right now. So far, since we launched in April last year, we've had more than 5,500 users around the world try out this software on Mac OS and on Windows. Yeah, and we are slowly pushing out new versions every month. Hopefully in the coming weeks, we will have a version for Linux and Raspberry Pi as well. So for those enthusiasts who have a Raspberry Pi at home, this is basically a $30 mini computer that you can buy on Amazon that runs Linux. You can pretty much run IoT Inspector in your home and have a capability of constantly monitoring what's going on your home network. So that's the plan.
So is IoT Inspector, is anyone leveraging this technology to make blockers so you can still cast to your Chrome, but Chrome can't talk back to people?
Excellent question, because this is one of the things that we're working on right now. Thank you, Helena. So far, IoT Inspector's main functionality is simply providing transparency so that users can have greater awareness of what's going on in their house. This is the first step. Using this data, we are currently building a list of advertising and tracking companies that we would incorporate into future versions of IoT Inspector, so that if a user decides to block certain connections to advertising companies, they could choose to do so. That being said, there's a big caveat. The high-level bit is that if you block certain connections, your devices may not work. Here's what I mean. So in everyday web surfing, many listeners may use ad blockers like AdBlock Plus or uBlock Origin to block out, say, ads on web pages. In many cases, these ad blockers work just fine without breaking web pages. Like if you go to NewYorkTimes.com and turn on an ad blocker, and New York Times would render most likely just fine on your browser. This may not be the case for IoT devices. For example, in our lab, we have a Roku Smart TV. Roku Smart TVs, just like your phone, support a large app ecosystem. You can download apps like Fox, CNBC, CNN, whatsoever. And many of these apps communicate with third-party advertising and tracking services. And we try in our lab that if we blocked certain, if we block connections to certain advertising tracking services, some of these apps simply won't load. It will simply crash. So there's a tension between privacy and usability. On the web, you can be pretty much private and by using ad blockers, and you can still surf the web by visiting lots of web pages. But in the case of IoT, there's a trade-off between usability and privacy. If you want privacy, if you want to block certain connections to tracking services, you may end up with smart TV channels that don't load or smart devices that don't work. And this is a hard problem, and we are still trying to figure out how to block traffic in a way that allows smart devices to continue functioning.
Cool. Have you, IoT Inspector, have you found anything or in any of your work, have you found anything where you've just been like, why is it doing that? What is that? Like, what is it trying to do? Like, have you ended up debugging anything or finding really, really surprising like data hogs where you're like, why is that doing that?
The high level bit is that your home network is noisier than you think. For listeners who can't see me, the air quotes noisy. By noisy, chatty. By chatty, I meant your smart devices, even if you're not using them, are constantly talking to the internet and talking with one another. They just won't stop talking. Some of these constant communications, well, even if you're not using these devices, are meant to maintain functionality. Like, say, for instance, I have a smart plug I buy from Amazon for like $10. It talks to its main servers every 15 seconds just to maintain a constant connection so that if I decide to turn on and off the smart plug is going to respond instantaneously. In many other cases, like if you say have a Chromecast device, it's constantly talking to other devices on a home network because it wants to discover other devices that it can pair with. This is how you're able to use your smartphone and cast your favorite YouTube or Hulu videos onto your Chromecast instantaneously without doing any much significant setup. So in a word, your home network is much chattier than you think. So this is one surprise that we found. Other kinds of surprises that we found has to do with privacy. In particular, I love echoes here. Much better now. In particular, with regard to smart TVs, we were surprised by the amount of tracking and we were surprised by the number of communications between smart TV apps and the third-party advertising tracking companies. And we were even more surprised by the kinds of data being sent from these smart TV apps to these third-party advertising tracking companies. Yes, there's a usual case of your smart TV sharing your user IDs to these third parties, but there are more insidious cases where smart TV apps are sharing the names or a Wi-Fi SSID or Wi-Fi name to some third parties. You may think that, okay, what's wrong with my Wi-Fi SSID, Wi-Fi host name? Well, the thing is, previous research has shown that based on your Wi-Fi SSID, Wi-Fi hotspot name alone, someone can pretty much infer your exact locations because there are third-party databases that would convert a Wi-Fi name to an exact geolocation. So the fact that these there are these smart TV apps. They're sharing your exact potentially what can be inferred as exact locations to third parties is pretty crazy. And we're not just talking about some random smart TV apps. There are like 2,000 or more smart TV apps on the Roku alone. We're talking about like large, important apps. It's TV channels, like, say, for instance, if I remember correctly, Discovery channels, big names like that. They're sharing Wi-Fi hotspot names of your house to some third parties. So these are some of the major surprises we found.
Have you gotten to do any, so you talked about plugs and you talked about smart TVs. Have you done anything with smart appliances, smart fridges or such? I think I don't totally understand the reason why certain appliances have become smart. Like, I don't get why I would want a smart refrigerator, though I know that, it could have a screen on it. It seems a little odd. Or the Nest, the smart thermostat. You guys, is IoT Inspector looking at that stuff as well?
So we have 5,500 users. We have evidence of some users looking at some of that kind of smart appliances. We haven't gone into deep analysis into the kind of traffic generated by, say, smart fridges by these users. Although we do have a smart fridge, Samsung smart fridge in our lab at Princeton, where we found that particular smart fridge has a screen, and it simply runs the Android operating system, and the smart from the network's point of view, that smart fridge is simply a giant Android device that lets you, if I remember correctly, that lets you add to some shopping list or buy something online. I don't have an idea why the fridge needs to be smart. Maybe some people find it useful to be able to, say, edit the shopping list on the fridge or buy things. So that's my guess.
So if I install IoT Inspector, do I get to opt in to sharing my house's data with the researchers?
By using IoT Inspector, the current version is such that you wouldn't have to agree to share the network traffic, anonymized network traffic with the Princeton researchers. Sounds a little creepy, but here are a few things I need to say. Number one, this study has been approved by the Ethics Board, the Institutional Review Board of Princeton. So all the data collected, we anonymize to the best of our ability. We have state-of-the-art data storage facilities. And even in the case if our database is hacked, if that ever happens, an attacker is very, very unlikely to be able to infer the exact identity of the participants, users of our study, because in the first place, we just don't collect. We try to minimize the amount of personally identifiable information being collected. Say, for instance, we don't ever collect your IP addresses. We don't even look at that. We don't even write that to the database so that we don't have that kind of potential problem. That being said, if you want to use this software, you have to consent to basically sharing your network data with the Princeton researchers. And depending on your liking, this may or may not be your thing. And we are thinking of releasing a future version that does not operate by sending the data back to us. That can operate independently, but that's more in the next few months.
Since it's an open source tool, it seems like if I was really into privacy, I could maybe take your tool and just take the source code and make my own version and go crazy with it. But I want you to have more and more data on what kind of surveillance is happening. So it seems like that wouldn't be quite worth it for my use cases of wanting to see what's up. Has anyone, how are you developing your open source tool part of this?
one of the main reasons we open source the software is so that people know exactly what's being collected as they run on their computers. That being said, we do have a part running at Princeton that collects the data from these individual installations. That part is not open source yet because we do have some proprietary machine learning algorithms running there, say for instance, to infer the identities of your smart devices, or say to detect any malicious traffic. If you're really interested in building your own tool, it would be difficult for you to just take the open source part and run it on your own, because the whole user interface is actually built on Princeton's infrastructure, so it would be difficult to do it on your own. That being said, you can still take the open source part and write a simple backend database on your own, so that you can actually collect some of the traffic on your own, bypassing Princeton, if you're concerned about the potential risks of sharing data to the researchers. And Helena, you just touched upon a very good point, in that one of the main objectives of this project, actually there are two main objectives of this project. One I just touched upon, which is actually providing transparency to individual consumers when it comes to smart IoT devices. Number two is actually to provide transparency for researchers, because at a very high level, the research community, in most cases, doesn't really have a lot of knowledge, systematic knowledge about the kinds of actual risks on actual IoT devices. So many researchers study the dangers, the risks of IoT devices by buying maybe dozens of smart devices in your lab and study those devices in the lab. But the thing about IoT devices is that there are so many of them. There are so many different vendors of them. And it's very difficult for researchers, academic researchers in particular, to study, to have a large coverage of smart IoT devices. And that's one of the main motivations behind this project, is to collect, as much as possible, real network traffic from real IoT devices as a result of real people's interactions, not just in the lab. We have so far 55,000 smart devices in the data set, and this is the largest data set ever built by academic researchers. So that is another motivation. If you're interested in downloading this software, not only are you gaining more insight into your smart home network, you're also helping the scientific community understand more about the security and privacy problems of IoT devices and build better solutions.
I think part of what I'm finding really great about just the website, which is very clean, just iotinspector.org to get the software. So it's free software that I can use to find out what of my IoT is talking to whom, just get more of a feel for it. But part of what I love about the site is you have a public section where I can download PDFs and read more about what is where the data is turned into contextualized information in these academic articles. Do you have a favorite of the articles that have been produced from this data?
Actually, the favorite article is the FAQ page, which we are immensely proud of. The FAQ page is compiled as a result of real users' actual questions, real users' concerns. Many of our users actually emailed us and asked about, oh, if I use IoT Inspector, are you spying on us? Or, can I use my IoT Inspector in my home network to do X and Y and Z? So that is actually really community built, the FAQ page. It's probably one of the longest FAQ pages I've ever seen. And you can find out everything about how the software works, when not to use it. Say, for instance, we're having this Zoom call. Don't use IoT inspectors because it's probably going to slow down network. Or in cases where you have medical devices or sensitive devices in the house, don't want to use it because you're sharing sensitive information to the Princeton researchers, things like that. So those are the kinds of things that real users asked us, and we compiled into a very long FAQ to address all those concerns, and we are proud of that, actually.
So one of the questions on the FAQ is, can I access the data set? And it seems like the plan is by the end of this year to have a full data, or at least some version of the data set will be available.
So right now we have some version of a subset of the data available. That subset comes from our office, our lab. That data set is available. But if you want to access the full data set, you have to be an academic researcher, and you have to gain approval from Princeton's institutional review board, basically the ethics board, to do that, because there's a process here. Because of the potential sensitive nature of the data, even though we don't have personally identifiable information, the data is still considered sensitive. Any access to the data set still requires the approval of Princeton's IRB, Institutional Review Board.
So Stu, why haven't you installed this application and gotten any of your IoT working?
Well, I mean, it sounds fascinating. I think I need to do that.
Just before Stu install this, right now we have a stable version on Windows 10. We did have a version for Mac OS, but we are actually rebuilding that, and we'll release the Mac OS version in about, hopefully, a week or so. So if you have a Mac at home, wait for the Mac version in a few weeks. Windows 10, it's fully functional, just install it. But beware, read the FAQs first.
So Lena, have you installed it while we're talking?
I've not quite installed it because I'm currently on my work computer, so I need to switch to my. Well, so is there I'm going to be clear about how nerdy I am. So is the Linux version working yet?
Linux version is working already. If you are, it actually works if you just download. So the entire software is written in pure Python, a popular programming language. If you are adamant about installing on your own right now, I can actually just download the source code and just run all over Python. It should work.
Okay. Cool.
Although we will be able to provide more. We'll provide clear instructions of how to use it on Linux in a few weeks as we release the Mac OS version. That's one thing. Second thing, don't ever run it now because we have a Zoom call, and if you run it on your different computer, that software is potentially going to slow down the network traffic.
Oh, I have gigabit Ethernet. I'm probably fine.
Okay.
But I won't do it now. But it's really interesting. So looking at the FAQ, thank you for the heads up on how much information is in there, because it really speaks to what sort of the questions that you're getting about, why does it look this way? What is it doing? It's really very lovely and well put together. Part of how I view the place of IoT is as accessibility technology. So I don't need my fridge to be an Android app. That's not very interesting. But my father is old, and we have an Alexa device with a smart bulb. So if he wants the light to turn on in the kitchen, so he doesn't have to go all the way to the switch, turn it on, and walk past it in the dark, I actually think of it as an accessibility device. And when you IoT not only as like a fun bonus or something that's used by people with means, but as something that can be used to help the elderly or physically unable or to work without assistance, it can be really interesting to look at what are the threat models for those populations and how can they, how can you help overcome that? So I'm very excited about this program.
I'm glad you raised the point about specific population, because that's one of the things we're actually working on. In particular, we looked at two cases where we haven't looked at the risks of IoT devices to the senior population yet. We've looked at children for now. In particular, we looked at, we had a paper published about the dangers of smart TVs to children, and we have a paper on Alexa devices to children. So smart TVs, we found evidence of like popular apps, say even Nickelodeon, for example, that sent sensitive information about the user to third parties. And in this case, this is a potential violation of COPPA, which is America's Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which says that apps aren't supposed to send, especially child-directed apps that have predominantly a children audience, aren't supposed to send any sensitive information to third parties. Of course, there are exceptions. So there are risks, potential risks like that, and we found that's on TVs. And we also found for Alexa systems, the thing about Alexa is that you can run third-party contents on Alexa. These are known as skills. There are more than 40,000 at least different kinds of skills on Alexas, and some skills are known to have pretty shady contents. Like say, if you use one of the dad joke skills, there might be like contents unsafe for kids to listen to. And because the thing is, many Alexas these days are in the same shared living space for adults as children, and children may potentially trigger some of these potentially weird, unsafe contents for kids and hear what they're not supposed to hear. So that's one aspect we're looking at, that we're trying to look at the risks of IoT devices to vulnerable populations like children. Senior people, that's something that we would like to look at in the coming years, in the coming months.
Let me just interrupt for a second and let our listeners and viewers know that we are being broadcast and streamcast on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You can also see and hear us on WHCR.org, as well as safeandsmart.org. You're listening to Community and Technology with special guest today, Professor Danny Huang, and Lena Marvin and Dave Burstein. Danny, are you going to be able to stay with us a little while longer?
Happy to.
Okay, great. Carry on, Lena.
Oh, I feel like I should have prepped a lot more than I did for this one because I was like, So IoT for children, that's a really interesting kind of band. Has that research predominantly been with IoT Inspector? Or have you also looked at the tracking technology on children? Because there's these kind of smart watch for kids.
I haven't personally worked on this before. My colleagues at Princeton, a few graduate students have torn apart toys, have looked at the apps associated with these toys. They have found something shady, like you said. I think if I remember correctly, one of the toys my colleague looked at had an app that constantly sent some private information, like I think the username or the email address of the user to a Chinese company based in China. Not sure why that is going on. This is one of the few examples of toys that are doing things that probably you're not aware of and parents should be concerned about. So toys.
So I really liked when you emphasized earlier that metadata that people of as sensitive is sensitive. The notion that the name of your Wi-Fi can be used to figure out exactly you are. Because it's not really just the name, right? It's the name plus like a more specific ID.
Nope, just the name.
Just the name?
Yeah.
Oh.
In fact, one interesting thing is that you can actually do this experiment on your own for any listeners. Write down the name of your Wi-Fi network, as well as the names, just one or two names of your neighbor's network, just the things you get, the network can see on your iPhone. And just enter these names into, I think Google has like a geolocation API that basically can turn these like one or two, three names of network Wi-Fi networks into a precise geolocation. So that is a proprietary data set. And there's also a free data set online. I forgot the name of it, that basically converts a name of the Wi-Fi.
Is it wiggle.net?
Yep, something. Yep, there you go.
Interesting.
So if you think your Wi-Fi name is innocuous, think again. Even if your Wi-Fi name is generic, a app on a smart TV or IoT device can potentially see other neighboring, your neighbor's Wi-Fi networks. And those neighbors' networks, Wi-Fi names can potentially reveal your locations as well. We've tested ourselves. It's pretty accurate. It's down to like a few meters. It's that accurate.
Okay, so it's
in New Jersey. Maybe it's more accurate in larger cities.
I would suspect so, but if the IoT devices themselves are also delivering this information and they have other bits of data, that's fascinating. Okay, well that's good to know. So
if you think that these devices already know your IP addresses, well, the thing is, IP addresses, yes, it's a little bit it's identifiable, but IP addresses aren't directly mapped to precise geolocation. Like IP addresses typically map to like certain internet service providers in a certain area, but not so much the exact street level address. So this is actually scarier than IP addresses. Sorry, I cut you off, Helena.
Oh, no worries at all. So a lot of people are concerned. So people aren't concerned about things they should be concerned about, and a lot of people seem to be concerned about stuff that I kind of think they shouldn't be concerned about. A lot of people are convinced that devices are actively listening and recording all of their words. So the Alexa is, because that's what it does. Like, it just records. But it seems like my smart fridge probably isn't.
So you touched upon a very good point about transparency of IoT devices. Like, yes, we want to bring transparency to the consumers about what their IoT devices are doing, but not just blindly bringing transparency, because there are many activities that may seem harmless to a user, but are actually fine. Here's a real email exchange between me and a user of IoT Inspector. The user emailed me and said that, oh my God, my smart plug is constantly talking to a military domain. Is a military spying on my house? So what turns out is that many IoT devices use this service called NTP, Network Time Protocol, to know what time it is, basically, because these smart devices, they're pretty dumb, actually. They don't have an accurate way of keeping track of time. They don't know what time it is. So that's why they have to constantly talk to some outside servers on the internet to ask, what time is it? What time is it? And it turns out the way NTP, Network Time Protocol, works is that many smart devices would pick a random time server in the world to ask for a time. And in this case, for this particular user of ours, his or her device happened to be talking to a NTP server maintained under military domain, which in most cases are fine, because the Network Time Protocol doesn't really transmit that much sensitive information except just the time. So in short, it is a hard problem how to help consumers learn more about their smart devices. On one hand, there's one extreme is the entire black box model, where you don't know what's going on with the smart devices. And on the other hand, if you tell a consumer exactly what's going on, that consumer may be misled into believing that his or her smart device is hacked or being spied on by the military, or in this case, if the Network Time Protocol is in a different country, by a different country. So that's sorry, Helena.
Go on.
Okay. So going back to your question of Alexa, yes, by design, my guess is that Alexa would have to be, its mic would have to be always on, so that whenever you say, "Hey Alexa," it's going to wake up and listen to your commands. It is not clear how Alexa uses that data. Whether it shares with anybody, we don't know yet. So that's a potential concern. But there's a trade-off between, which I touched on earlier, usability and privacy. Like, you want your Alexa to be usable. It needs to constantly listen to your conversations, and in return, you sacrifice a little bit of your privacy. Like, we don't know how much privacy there is going on. It could be that Alexa maybe just stores the recordings on the local device without sharing it to the Amazon's servers. It may be sharing. We don't know yet at this point. But you touched upon a very good point about usability and privacy.
So the notion of my devices are listening to me, and this is concerning. I almost always have my phone with me. My phone also has a microphone. I suspect my phone isn't generically listening to me, but that it could be. And the notion of like, what is your privacy and what is your convenience and how do we navigate these, especially for at-risk populations. So this has been coming up a lot in certain conversations I've been having, which are like, is my phone listening to me now that I am going to protests? And it's possible it is. And I don't want to tell people that that's unlikely, because if you become a person of note to law enforcement, especially in New York City, they have been known to spy in a myriad of ways. That's kind of outside of the conversation of Internet of. But do you consider phones part of the Internet of Things?
I consider phones as internet connected devices of things, basically. And just one note that I'll point out is that your phone may be listening to you, but actually the bigger danger comes from third-party apps on your phones. Yes, indeed, your Android or Apple iOS devices are constantly gathering data from us. My personal belief is that these are large companies. They may have mechanisms to safeguard the data, and they follow certain laws and protocols as they safeguard the data. Not that I'm saying that I trust them completely. All I'm saying is that these are relatively reputable companies. I'm making this statement because I want to draw a comparison with respect to other third-party apps developers. Many apps you download may ask you for a myriad of permissions like cameras or microphones or locations. Sometimes in many cases, you don't even know why such apps are asking for locations. So if you're a listener and you try to recall in the past 30 days of downloading an app, you might have downloaded an app that has nothing to do with microphones and is still collecting microphone that still ask for microphone permission, or an app that requests location data, but on the surface it doesn't really need that much location. So I can't recall the exact report, but there's a New York Times report a few months back that purchased data, real location data from a data brokerage firm that collected data from these third-party apps. So let me say that again, it's a long sentence. So there are these third-party apps that send your location data to some data brokerage firms, and New York Times somehow obtained this data, and New York Times was able to plot the locations of real people in Manhattan. That, I think, is a scary part, because that is completely not transparent to us, the users. We're talking about some random third-party apps that requested, like say a calculator, they may request locations. And for many users, the automatic response is that, okay, accept, without knowing why the smart calculator app on your Android phone needs your location data. And in many cases, these location data are shared, or I don't know, even sold to these data brokerage firms for whatever purposes, we don't know. And that end up becoming the New York Times report. Anyways, my point is that your phones may be listening to you, and the more immediate actionable things that as consumers we can do is to be more aware of the kinds of permissions that some third-party apps are requesting, like especially locations, cameras, or microphones, because we're talking about third parties, some of which may be shady and not reputable, and we don't know their data practices. And that is actually the more risky part. I'm not saying that Apple or Android are not doing anything shady, but secure what you can secure first. Be careful about what permissions you grant. Since I'm talking here, I also like to cite one of my colleagues at NYU's latest work on Android permissions. In fact, they found there are hundreds of apps on the Android App Store that are used for spouse tracking. This is real research published recently. These are apps that look like calculators, whatnot. And a spouse, let's say a husband wants to track a wife. A husband may decide to download a calculator, air quote calculator, onto a wife's phone. And this calculator may simply constantly send location information back to some central servers where the husband could potentially track that information. And my colleague at NYU actually has seen real evidence of that. So there are apps that do that for whatever purposes, for spouse tracking, for the information to be sold to some third-party companies. So beware of what you install on your phones and about the permissions. That's a long discussion on things that are not really smart home IoT devices, but I think it is important that our listeners know about it.
How did you get focused into IoT?
IoT, one of the reasons I focus on IoT is that it is a relatively understudied area in that security and privacy of apps is pretty well-known area in the research community, but for IoT, it's hard because predominantly there's a lack of data. Like for apps, many researchers study apps by building programs that would go through thousands and thousands of apps on the Android App Store automatically and analyze these apps onto their laboratory smartphone devices. For IoTs, this is a much harder problem because we can't, like as a computer scientist, we can't just write a program to like interact with thousands of devices because like we can't download IoT devices. We have to buy them in the first place. We have to buy them. We have to have the money to buy them. We have to have the money time to set them up in the lab. And every IoT device communicate with our program differently. So it's actually a hard problem. And I found it. I actually came from a background of building systems that collect empirical evidence for security research. And I thought that, this scientific community lacks actual empirical evidence of the kinds of behaviors on thousands upon thousands of smart devices. And I thought that this might be a good opportunity for me as a researcher. And number one. Number two, as a consumer, I have smart devices in my house. And I was actually pretty frustrated about of setting up wireless hotspots and running TCP dump or Wireshark on these devices to analyze them. So these become the motivations of me to start leading a project in IoT.
So what do you think of the statement, if the product or if the app is free, or if the product is free, if the service is free, then you're the product? Does that resonate for you?
It resonates me on a personal level. On a scientific level, it seems that this statement suggests that maybe a lower cost implies less privacy. And if you were willing to pay for an app, it means more privacy. If this is a statement, then I don't know. Maybe that's a misconception among many consumers that, oh, if this app is not free, you have to pay for it. Maybe the developers aren't going to use my personal data for money. We don't have that evidence yet in the scientific community. So in general, whether you're paying for an app a lot or paying little for an app, still always be aware of the potential privacy issues.
I really like that your response is, no, they might still be spying on you even if you're paying for it. That's what I heard.
The thing is, we don't have any evidence. Yeah, we don't have any evidence. In fact, you might be misled into believing that, oh, here's one motivating example that may mislead someone. Like, if you subscribe to, for instance, there are two tiers of Hulu. There's a cheaper tier where you will see ads, and there are the more expensive tier where you won't see ads. We don't have any evidence so far as to whether the cheaper tier actually sent more private information to the more expensive tier. We don't have evidence yet. That's one example. So just beware. Whatever you're paying, whenever you're using a third-party service, whenever you're using some internet-based service, just be aware of the potential risks. And a few things you can do include like installing ad blocker if you're on a browser, or if you are on an if you're using smart home devices. If you want, just use a different email address just for those smart devices, so that It is harder. I won't say it's impossible. It is harder for the IoT device companies to track you across different platforms. So those are the kinds of mitigations so far. I won't say they are solutions, but they are mitigations.
So you're still up for installing your IoT?
Sorry, you broke up. You broke up a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Sure. So Stu, are you going to install your IoT now?
Well, you know, I think I'm going to take a look at Danny's application and exactly see how that can help me monitor what I'm doing. I'm certainly still paranoid, especially given his precautions about all of the tracking that happens behind our backs that we're not even aware of. But the application is fascinating, Danny, and is groundbreaking and really important. And I want to thank you for coming on the air and sharing that with us. And I know before we go, Dave wanted to talk a little bit about NYU. Dave, are you there?
Yep. I'm friends with a lot of
Did you have some questions for Danny about NYU?
Yeah, I'm friends with a lot of the people at NYU. They're probably the most advanced wireless research literally on the planet, including places like Stanford and MIT, which relate. What made you decide to go there? Do you know Ted Rappaport?
Is that a question for me, Dave?
Yeah.
Um,
Did you know Ted Rappaport and Tom Marzetta?
No, I don't know those people. One of the draws of NYU is that they have a very strong security group. I actually know some of the folks in NYU security group, like say, for instance, Professor Damon McCoy or Professor Justin Kappos, like way before, like, 5 or 6 years before. So these people are the main attractions of why I decided to come to NYU.
That surprised me because NYU Wireless, where Tom Marzetta is the lead now, Tom invented Massive MIMO, which is at the heart of what is happening in 5G. And Ted was the one who proved that you can use millimeter waves for ordinary phones and consumer offerings. So they're really outstanding there. I was assuming that was what pulled you towards NYU. I don't know the security people at all.
I guess I'll have a chance to say hi to these people. I don't really know that much about the wireless network in the sense of like the more hardware radio level.
Yeah. What are the courses that you're going to be doing?
Well, starting the spring, I'll be offering class on, surprise, surprise, IoT security and privacy. So not a surprise at all. Hopefully a graduate level course that students can learn about, or even undergraduate plus graduate level course where students read about the latest papers and understand basically what are some of the security and privacy risks of smart home devices.
Will they get to look at real data and play with actual devices?
Real data, real devices.
Nice.
Danny, is there a way that folks can get in touch with you if they have further questions or how can they communicate with you? Are you open to that?
Go to iotinspector.org and you'll find contact information from me and my team if you have any questions. So that's iotinspector.org.
Okay, great. Well, we're about winding up. Any final comments, Lena?
This was fantastic. Thank you for introducing this tool. I think it's really cool. I'm going to install it when I'm not on a Zoom call.
Yes, and it full disclosure, it may break your wireless network. It may.
Okay.
I'll fix it.
Dave, any final comments or questions for the professor?
Just thanks, because this is good, important work, and it's good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's
again, thank you so much, Danny. I'm going to send you a link to the show, and please come back again and give us an update about your exciting work as you settle in here in the Big Apple.
Will do.
Okay,
hopefully
great.
everyone's taking care of themselves.
We've been speaking with Professor Danny Huang, who is a professor soon to be at NYU, and talking about his inspector, Internet of Things inspector. Fascinating project. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Dave.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, thank you. You've been listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM.
Like this too. It's fascinating. Okay.
Okay.
Just curious, like this is going on to live radio at the same time?
You're streaming live.
Oh.